Good morning. I'm Pastor Ryan, and I'm so glad that everybody could be here today. And as we get started this morning, I was getting ready for this sermon, and one of the reasons why people like living in the Midwest, and something you'll hear a lot, is that people like experiencing different seasons. You know, they like having the spring, summer, fall, and winter, and the different times of year. And that's one of the reasons why people say they like the Midwest. And if you were here this last week, we experienced a couple of them just over this last week. But we also measure other things by seasons too, not just the time and the weather, but also we have football season and baseball season and basketball season. We have different seasons. But our spiritual life has different seasons as well, where we hope that our spiritual maturity is always up and to the right. So this is what we skipped one. Can we go back one slide? There we go. We hope our spiritual maturity is always up and to the left. We hope that's how it goes, or up and to the right. We hope that's how it goes, where it's just nice, smooth sailing. As time goes on, we grow more and more mature. But the reality is that's not always what we experience. Oftentimes, it's a little bit more jagged. It oftentimes looks a lot more like this, where there's times where we're growing, and then times where we feel like we're falling back. There's different highs and lows, different mountaintops and different valleys. And so the question today is, how do we navigate spiritual maturity in the different seasons of life? How do we navigate spiritual maturity, and how do we continue to grow when things are going well and feels like things are going the right way? How do we lean into that and make sure to keep going the right way? And when we feel like we're in the valley or falling away, how do we lean into God and trust Him to keep growing in our faith? And so we're going to be in 2 Chronicles today, and we're going to look at King Asa. And King Asa was one of the wise kings of Judah. And he was one of the wise kings because in all of the different seasons of his life, he was able to stay close to God and lean into Him. And so 2 Chronicles chapter 14, verses 1 through 8. And this is where we can read about King Asa. And Abijah rested with his ancestors, and he was buried in the city of David. And Asa, his son, succeeded him as king. And in the days, the country was at peace for 10 years. Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He removed the foreign altars and the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He commanded Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and to obey his laws and commands. He removed the high places and incense altars in every town in Judah, and the kingdom was at peace under him. He built up the fortified cities of Judah, since the land was at peace. No one was at war with him during these years, for the Lord gave him rest. Let us build up these towns, he said to Judah, and put walls around them with towers and gates and bars. The land is still ours because we have sought the Lord our God. We sought him, and he has given us rest on every side. So they built and prospered. Asa had an army of 300,000 men from Judah, equipped with large shields and spears, and 280,000 from Benjamin, armed with small shields and bows. All of these were brave and fighting men. And so Asa, when he became king of Judah, when he took the throne, he inherited it during a time of peace, because his father Abijah was at war with the northern kingdom of Israel, but he had conquered that, and because of his victories at war, when Asa became king, they were at peace with Israel, and they were at peace with Judah, and they were at peace with all the other nations around them. And so Asa took this time to build up the fortifications. They built walls around the city and repaired them. And he built up his army so that they were ready when someone did attack. And it says for the first 10 years they were at peace. And so he had this time of peace and rest, where he could focus on getting things ready internally. He could focus on building up his army. But more importantly, he focused on turning Judah back to God. He got rid of the idols and the Asherah poles and the high places and everything that was pulling the people of Judah away from God. He focused in this time of peace on returning Judah to God. And he said, we're going to not just get rid of all the other idols, we're going to obey all his laws and commands. And there was peace for 10 years. And so Asa was experiencing that spiritual mountaintop. But he didn't just use this time of peace to coast. He didn't use this time of peace to pat himself on the back and say what a great king he is. He used this time of peace to turn to God, to turn his heart and the heart of his people to God. And the emphasis, though, still wasn't on his military achievements or what he did as king, but it was about how Asa was seeking the Lord. And he even recognized this, that he didn't say, we're at peace because of our military. We're not at peace because we built up our walls. He says, Asa himself said that we're at peace because we sought the Lord God. And so in this mountaintop experience that Asa was experiencing, he recognized that this mountaintop was because God had brought them there. And so he used this time to continue to build on the trajectory of people returning to God. And he stewarded the mountaintop well. And so when we're on that mountaintop experience, it's easy to begin to coast, to say things are going well, and just kind of expect that to keep going. And it's also easy for us to, when we're on the mountaintop, to say it's because of us. Like, it would have been really easy for Asa to say we're at peace because of the big army he built up. It would have been easy for him to say we're at peace because of the conquest his dad was on when he was king. But Asa recognized that none of that's true. They were at peace because of what God was doing. And so he was stewarding the mountaintop well, and he was using that time and the mountaintop experience to prepare, to get people closer to God and to prepare for the next season. And then we see that in 2 Chronicles 14, 9 through 15. They were at a time of peace for 10 years, but that came to an end. And in verses 9 through 15, Zerah the Cushite marched out against them with an army of thousands upon thousands and 300 chariots, and came as far as Marishah. Asa went out to meet him, and when they took up battle positions in the valley of Sephthah near Marishah, then Asa called to the Lord his God and said, Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, Lord our God, for we rely on you, and in your name we have come against this vast army. Lord, you are our God. Do not let mere mortals prevail against you. The Lord struck down the Cushites before Asa and Judah. The Cushites fled, and Asa and his army pursued them as far as Gerar. Such a great number of the Cushites fell that they could not recover. They were crushed before the Lord and his forces. The men of Judah carried off large amounts of plunder. They destroyed all the villages around Gerar, for the terror of the Lord had fallen on them. They looted all the villages, since there was much plunder there. They also attacked the camps of the herders and carried off droves of sheep and goats and camels. They returned to Jerusalem. So Asa had experienced this time of peace, the spiritual high, and he stewarded it well to prepare him for the time of battle, for the time when this army that was thousands upon thousands was going to march against him. And the term thousands upon thousands was just used when, not as a specific amount, but just to say that to show just how many people were marching against Israel or against Judah. To show that the number was almost uncountable for people who were standing there watching. And so this vast, huge army was marching against Judah. And it seemed like this army was so big that there was nothing that Judah would have been able to do to stand against it. But Asa relied on God, and he used that mountaintop experience to prepare for the time of battle. And so we need to steward our mountaintop experiences, but we need to rely on God in the valley. And that's exactly what Asa did. Because he was coming against an army that was twice as big as his. He was coming against an army that was from a nation that was far greater than theirs. Because a lot of scholars believe that Zerah the Cushite was from Egypt. And they made connections to the Pharaoh of Egypt at the time. And they think he might have even been the Pharaoh of Egypt. And they were marching. Egypt was one of the great big powerhouses in the ancient world. And they were marching against this small kingdom of Judah. And instead of surrendering or running away in fear, Asa relied on God. And it says that the Lord struck down the Cushites. And this was such a great defeat by Judah and by God that the Cushites, it took decades for them to recover. In fact, it's not for almost 300 years later when Egypt finally recovers their numbers to march against King Josiah. So this defeat was so great, not because of how great King Asa was, but because of how great God was. And we see that Asa, in the time of battle, trusted God. And so when things are going well, it's easy for us to trust God. When we're on that mountaintop experience, it's easy for us to turn to God and say, I trust you. Because we know that things are going well and we're not actually putting anything to the test. But in the times of battle and things are going tough, that's where it shows where we're really putting our trust. When we're feeling the pressure, when we're feeling the stress, when we're experiencing a time of battle, when we're in that valley, that's where we really show our hearts. And are we really trusting God? Are we really putting our trust in Him to get us through? And because the pressure shows us where our trust is. The pressure shows us where our trust is. And so not only was Asa stewarding the season of peace and prosperity well, he was also relying on God in the valley. In the tough season, he was relying on God. And this happened, and Asa, the entire time, relied on God. And so right after this, in chapter 15, verses 1 through 9, the Spirit of God came on Azariah, son of Oded, and he went to meet Asa and said to him, Listen to me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. For a long time, Israel was without the true God, without a priest to teach, and without the law. But in their distress, they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him, and he was found by them. In those days, it was not safe to travel about, for all the inhabitants of the lands were in great turmoil. One nation was being crushed by another, and one city by another, because God was troubling them with every kind of distress. But as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your works will be rewarded. When Asa heard these words and the prophecy of Azariah, son of Oded, the prophet, he took courage. He removed the detestable idols from the whole land of Judah and Benjamin, and from the towns he had captured in the hills of Ephraim. He repaired the altar of the Lord that was in front of the portico of the Lord's temple. Then he assembled all Judah and Benjamin and the people of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon, who had settled among them. For large numbers had come over to him from Israel when they saw that the Lord, his God, was with him. So after this great battle, this time when Judah stood up to the Cushites and God was there, and God fought for Judah. After this great victory, Azariah, the prophet, comes to meet Asa and his leaders and all of Judah and gave them this message of encouragement. this message that said, you sought God, and he was found by you. And for a long time, the people of Israel had turned from God. They continued to turn from God and turn to idols. This is a very common theme as we read through the Old Testament and read through Israel, that even after God led them out of Egypt, they quickly forgot who God was and they turned to idols. And every time that God showed his faithfulness, showed victory to the people of Israel, they always turned to idols. And Azariah said that when they were doing this, it wasn't safe to move about, but when they sought God, God was found by them. And he was encouraging Asa and encouraging the leaders of Judah to continue to seek God as they have been, to continue to do what they're doing. And he said, because you're doing this, because you're seeking God, he will be found by you and he will help you prosper. And this is encouraging because in the time of trial, Asa recognized what God was doing. And we need to do the same thing. When we're in a season of trial, we need to recognize what God is doing. We need to recognize that God is working. Just because God feels far from us doesn't mean he is. Psalm 139 tells us that even if we go into the depths of the earth, God is still there with us. His right hand will hold us fast. So Asa, in the time of battle, recognized what God was doing, recognized that God was working to not only save them immediately from the Cushites and the Egyptians, but that the defeat was so great that they were saved in the future as well. For generations, Egypt was not going to be able to march against Judah. And Asa recognized what God was doing in a season of trial. The New Testament in Romans 8:28, Paul's writing and he says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. See, God is concerned with us. He loves us and he wants what's best for us. And because of that, when things seem like they're going wrong, when we feel like God is far from us, it's actually not true. When we're struggling, when we're in a time of trial and a time of battle, God is there. And he's working all things for our good. When this army marched against Asa, it didn't seem like it was a good thing at the time. Multiple times the size of our nation. But it ended up, God can't be stumbled up by the plans of man. He has a plan and he's working it for our good. And so this army that seemed like it was going to easily conquer Judah was defeated by God, Judah, for generations. And Jesus, as he was also walking on earth, he faced a lot of the same trials and temptations that we face. And he suffered alongside us. The Bible tells us that he was a man of suffering, a man associated in, a man who knew sorrow. And Jesus promised us that when we're in those hard times, those seasons of battle and seasons of trials, that he's not far from us. He sent the Holy Spirit to be with us, to help guide us and to encourage us, to strengthen us and help us turn to God, to seek God so because when we seek God, he will be found. And so when we're facing these times of trials, we don't need to worry because God is with us. We don't need to worry. We don't need to stress because God knows what he's doing. God won't take us to something if he isn't going to take us through. And one of the best things he's doing is making us more like Jesus. All the trials and battles we face, when we turn to God and trust him to get us through, he makes us more like Jesus. And so the bottom line today is trust God in every season. And turn the people to God. So that when they got to a time of war, when they faced battles, they were prepared. When things started to go wrong, they were ready. And in that time of trial, Asa looked to see how God was working to save them, to work for their good. In Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8, it says that there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So as we're going through different seasons of life, we don't need to be a philosopher, we don't need to be a scholar or a biblical expert to understand that there's different seasons to life. That there's a time for everything, that there's seasons. There's seasons to life. There's seasons to our spiritual journey as well. They're a regular part of life. And there are these times and these seasons, but there's also God. And God is working everything. He is sovereign and he's working everything to achieve his plan, to achieve what he has decided is going to happen. So from the time we're born to the time we die, God is working everything for our good, to make us more like Jesus. And in these statements that King Solomon made in Ecclesiastes, he's affirming that, there's seasons to life. He's affirming that, things look different side by side, but God is doing everything. God is in control. He's working everything. And all of these seasons are good in their time because in all of them, God uses them to work in us and through us. And so everything, in the end, is beautiful in its time. Even the things that seem like they're the darkest, God turns into something greater. And we saw that on the cross. What should have been the darkest day, Satan's greatest victory, ended up being his greatest defeat. Because even the darkest days, God turns into the most beautiful. And the ones that when we feel farthest from him, God reaches us and uses that to bring us even closer to him than we've ever been.